Good morning. Apparently, actually, I'm here for almost 2 weeks in Europe, and the entire time that I'm here, the weather in Portland is beautiful and sunny and warm, and then I believe during my flight home, it'll return back to this weather again. So to help me better tune before I get started, I want to get a little chance to understand who's in the audience. We always expect these conferences to be full of all experts. And we found is, in general, about half the audience is kind of seriously wondering what this Puppet thing is. So if I can just real quick, who's using Puppet right now? Can you raise your hand? Okay. Who's using some other automation tool instead of or in addition to Puppet? Okay. What about some kind of automation you wrote yourself? You know, your lots of shell scripts, Perl scripts. Who's not doing any automation and is wondering what they're missing? And who's brand new to Puppet? Okay. You don't have to, the more truthful you are, the better it is. So for those of you who are already using Puppet, most of this initial talk is going to be a review more than new information, because for a long time we gave intermediate and advanced talks all day, and all the new people were like, still have no idea what Puppet is. I will have time for questions at the end, and I'll also have a little bit of discussion about some of the things that we're working on as a company, so you get a better sense of where the technology is going, where the products are going, and then right after that, you can ask me as many annoying questions as we have time for. Before we get talking about the technology at all, I think it's worth talking about how much interesting and weird stuff is going on in the market right now. I think the job of a sysadmin by itself is generally pretty annoying. My definition of an admin, whether you're talking about a system administrator or an executive administrator, almost any admin, you don't notice the admin until something goes wrong, right? It's the CEO has no idea who you are until the website's down, and then he or she is standing behind you yelling at you until it's up, which obviously we all know being yelled at really helps improve your performance. So you take that plus things like studies have shown that on average sysadmins get interrupted every 15 minutes, and it takes about 30 minutes from being interrupted to recover from being interrupted. So most lives of an admin is kind of like a rabbit scared waiting for danger. And combine that with there's this constant pressure to do a lot more, to do it faster, to do it without adding any money, and ideally to work with these horrible outsourcing companies that you've worked with, who don't want to do anything for you. So that's kind of the baseline of what our lives are like in general anyway. Also, technology for most organizations is becoming more critical. 10, 15 years ago, you know what, we're going to take the website down for a couple of days. You know, that service didn't work for a little while. It's not the worst thing in the world. Obviously, there's always been some critical services, but it seems like these days every service is critical. Everything has to be up all the time. And where previously some part of your business ran through the technical infrastructure, these days everything is technology, right? I think Mark Andreessen said software is eating the world. And the way I think about that is basically, everything that you do these days goes through software. And we saw in the early 2000s, a lot of companies kind of convinced themselves they weren't technology companies, so they outsourced a lot of their core technology to people who, as far as I could tell, hated them. And they spent about 5 to 7 years kind of trying to figure out, well, what are the consequences? And they learned pretty quickly that you move more slowly, it's more expensive, you have a worse experience, your customers hate you back, things like that. And so now we're seeing the opposite. We're seeing a lot of companies bring their technology back in-house, acknowledge that they have to be experts in technology, they have to invest in people, they have to invest in tech, they have to invest in the things that help them succeed with technology. And this is a pretty big shift from especially larger companies, but all the way down to smaller companies. But it's not enough to just spend more money on technology. You've got to be faster, and you've got to learn faster. It's not just about velocity, right? It's not let's do this very, very quickly. It's let's do this a lot of times, and in the course of doing it a lot of times, that gives you the chance to, the second time is hopefully going to be smarter than the first time, and the third time smarter than the second time. So it's about not just speed of execution, but speed of iteration. And really crucially, and this is where a lot of the big companies that traditionally have sold, especially to larger enterprises, this is what scares them is you can't buy your way to moving faster, right? There's no check you can write that will suddenly convert your company from a relatively slow-moving, not very good at technology company to a fast-moving, incredibly modern software company. You just have to do it yourself, right? You have to become good at it one way or another, and it's a pretty significant shift. And importantly, it's at least as much of a cultural shift as it is a technology shift. All the best technology in the world, without the cultural tools and abilities to succeed with that technology, doesn't do you any good. Whereas the best culture in the world, it'll go find a way with whatever's available. Speaking of culture, the DevOps movement is pretty much a cultural movement. Yes, there are a bunch of tools, there are a bunch of technologies, there's a bunch of practices that people think about when they think about DevOps, and Puppet is certainly one of them. But again, all those tools done the old school way won't get you there. And if you're flexible and you're thinking about tools and tech, then but you're very motivated to get the culture right, then you'll end up doing pretty well. We did a survey on DevOps right around this time last year. We had 9,300 respondents, which is the largest survey. Computer Associates just did their own survey, I think, and they got less than 1/10 the number of people who responded. So lots and lots of people responded to the survey. And the goal of the survey, obviously, for one, was to talk about how great DevOps is, to better understand it, but also to understand, we could do a survey here and figure out and have each of you write down your definition of DevOps and then see how many unique definitions of DevOps we ended up with. So rather than kind of get into a semantics argument about what DevOps is or is not, we wanted to understand, when you say you do DevOps, what does that mean, right? What tools do you use? What processes do you use? And then really crucially, what kind of performance does your company have, and in what ways does your company's performance relate to DevOps, do you think, right? So what things do you do that demonstrate success at DevOps, or that you would like to improve by investing in DevOps? And fundamentally, like I said, DevOps is more about culture. It's about the alignment of the technology within your organization to the goals of the business. So yes, you have to be secure. Yes, you have to be stable, which for a long time was pretty tough. Security is still moderately difficult for organizations, and it's probably not going to get much better for a while. But that's not enough anymore, right? You have to be secure, you have to be stable, you have to be fast, and you have to actually do what the business wants you to do, not just what IT wants you to do. And so we found a lot of really interesting things in this report, and got a good sense of, again, when you say you're doing DevOps, some of it's pretty basic. Probably you use version control. So I highly recommend going and looking up the report. You can get it from our website. It is very, very long, but we've got some summary material on the website also. And that's one of the things that's really changing. There was an article out last week, I think, showing more than 70% of people who work in IT, I think this was in the US, the study was, were familiar with DevOps, knew what it was, knew roughly what it was supposed to mean. So it's definitely a mainstream movement at this point. And obviously, we're all tired of talking about the cloud, but it is still affecting things. It is, in many ways, significant technology shifts, and it's going to take not 5 years, not 10 years, but a long time for all of our jobs to kind of rearrange around this new reality. And I think especially one of the things that I think people talk less about than they should, people lump the cloud they lump everything into one thing, right? It's like every time I'm running something on somebody else's server, that's the cloud. And some of that is like fancy, fast API-driven hosting, which is really nice, but it's not rocket science. But the thing that I think is actually changing the market and changing our jobs more than anything is software as a service. And in some ways, software as a service is just outsourcing, which I just 5 minutes ago said was one of the roots of all evil. But the great thing about software as a service is instead of outsourcing at, say, the hardware layer or at the legalese contract layer, you're outsourcing essentially vertically. You're outsourcing an entire service. And when I was a sysadmin in the 90s and the early 2000s, as a company, you had to be good at everything. You had to be good at email, you had to be good at websites, you had to be good at backups and storage and database, you had to be good at everything. And because you had to be good at everything, and companies hated investing in people, we would have $1 million storage arrays and couldn't get raises. you had to be a little bit good at everything, but you weren't given the luxury of being really very good at anything in particular. And so you're kind of an inch deep and a mile wide. Well, with SaaS, you can say, you know what? We don't have to be good at CRM anymore, and we don't have to be good at marketing automation anymore, and we don't have to be good at email anymore. Thank God. Email's the worst. So all these things that are important, right? We all know those things matter, but they aren't the core of what we're supposed to do, right? They're not the reason for this company's existence. You can give those to somebody like Salesforce, and it's the reason Salesforce exists, is to give you really horrible CRM software. The reason Workday exists is to give you HR software. And so now your job just got narrower, and because your job gets narrower, it gets deeper. And it's not just individually, right? As an individual, you get greater opportunity to specialize, which is great. Yes, you should still maintain some of that breadth. You should know about more than just the tiny little sliver of reality that you live in. But you get to become much deeper in your skill set. And then as an organization, your organization gets optimized too, right? Your team, your management structure, the things that your company care about. You don't see reports for your CRM uptime showing up at the same level of importance as reports for the we made money last week, right? And those things should show up very differently because they have different meanings for your company. So that move towards SaaS and that heavy adoption of SaaS is big. And the cool thing is, the company who you're buying services from gets the same benefit, right? Salesforce is also specialized. They also don't think about email. They also don't think about marketing automation. Well, I think Salesforce bought a marketing automation company, so they do. But each of you gets to specialize. Each of you gets to narrow down your focus, and each of you gets to invest much more deeply in technology, which I think is a positive effect for nearly all of us. There's also a trend towards, I think my favorite thing about the trend towards immutable infrastructure is that a synonym for immutable infrastructure is ephemeral infrastructure. And you think it's both unchanging and transient. I think it's pretty funny. And the trend here is, well, rather than having servers whose lifetimes are measured in years, where we build an emotional relationship to the server, we give them birthday presents, and usually in the form of security updates. So rather than having that, let's have servers whose lifetimes are measured in hours or minutes or maybe days. And rather than ever modifying those machines, we'll just bring up a new one and shoot the old one. And then the individual components are immutable and ephemeral. And the overall infrastructure experiences change not through change on the servers, but through change of which machines exist. And I think everyone knows that this is super exciting and super sexy, and no one has any idea exactly how it's going to affect our lives yet. It's still relatively young. Containers have been around forever. We already know what image sprawl looks like from the VMware early days, so I think we're going to see a lot of that. We're going to get to see reinvention a lot of the painful parts of the VMware world. But I think it's going to be really interesting. It's going to affect especially a lot of how we do build pipelines over the next few years. And certainly if you listen to the Docker materials, they're going to tell you that it's magically going to solve all the problems that existed before. So I look forward to that. Lastly, and I think this is both my least and most favorite thing about what's affecting our lives. So traditionally, if you're a developer and you go to IT and you say, hey, I would like a new server, I would like an OpenStack cloud, I would like an API to deploy my hardware to, my application to, and IT goes, I can definitely do that in 18 months, maybe. Then the developer goes, well, that's annoying. But now the developer goes, okay, great. And then they just go and build their own on Amazon or somewhere else. And then before long, you find out that you've got production infrastructure doing tens or hundreds of millions a year in transactions that's unaudited, unsecured, unmaintained. It's maintained by a developer. And by the way, they just called you to tell you that it's production because there was an outage, and the CEO doesn't call the developer to say there's an outage. The CEO calls you and says there's an outage, and so now it's your problem, and you have to go figure out how to fix all this. And in some ways, this is horrible, right? This is kind of your worst nightmare. But it's competition, right? It used to be you could just go, yeah, I don't feel like doing that. And people were kind of stuck. Like, they could bring their own laptops and phones to work, but they couldn't bring their own private clouds to work. Well, now they can. So you can't say no anymore, right? You have to respond. And obviously all of you are going to say yes, and you're all doing all these things. So I'm not talking about the people in this room who are all beautiful and fantastic, but the horrible conservative IT organizations that aren't interested in moving quickly, that aren't interested in figuring out how to adopt the new, best, cool stuff, and really aren't interested, again, in aligning the goals of IT with the goals of the business. This is good for them because it puts a kind of external pressure on them that hasn't been there before. And it's certainly affecting how people work. So I think it's pretty interesting. So that's a quick summary of what I think are some of the significant trends that are affecting our world. When I led our strategic planning at my company about 18 months ago, it was just, we kind of cataloged a lot of these, and it was shocking just how many different things are indicating significant churn in our lives, significant changes in the lives of sysadmins, developers, IT overall, and just, I don't think any of us think, IT, our jobs, our tech stack, it's going to look pretty similar in 5 years than it does today. In a year, it's probably going to look similar, but 5 years, I think we all believe it's going to look pretty different. And to me, that means it's a pretty exciting time, right? It's a pretty interesting time. So, obviously, all those things, all those complicated, interesting trends that are affecting our lives, that's mostly what we're here to help you with. I coincidentally picked only trends that affect our ability to help you. Sorry about that. So we at Puppet Labs are here to help you automate your lives in a way both to help you move faster, help you better align the goals of your work with the goals of your business, and help you outcompete the nasty, nasty shadow IT. So, and again, because most of you are already doing automation, you already know all of these things. But automation is great for lots of reasons. The first one is it's way, way faster. I'm a very good typist, but computers can type a command 1,000 times much more quickly than I can, especially when the command includes 78 lines of nested error management. I always get the 14th level of nesting wrong in my hand typing shell scripts. It's also just much more productive. I can get a lot more done in a lot less time. And a lot of people, when I talk about the kind of productivity that automation gives you, they go, wow, this is great, so I won't need as many people. It's like, well, or you could have technology that doesn't suck. And in most cases, people aren't looking to reduce the size of their team. What they're looking to do is, I want to do 10 times as much stuff with the same group. And a lot of times when we talk about productivity, it's not even so much, I want to do this 10 times more often or 10 times more of this. It's that, today I would like to get this much done, and I'm only able to get, I've got these wide-ranging scope of the world that I want to build, and I can build shoes, and I would like to build houses, right? It's a much bigger world people are trying to build. And then another thing you get out of automation that is really tough to get out of normal reality is you get a lot of insight into what's going on. What is actually happening? Who's configured correctly? If you're not configured correctly, what are the consequences of that? Have there been errors? What are the errors that, what services are affected by those errors? These things are all an important outcome of automation, but fundamentally what it comes down to is you deploy faster, you deploy more frequently, and you deploy with higher reliability. You deploy with much greater reliability. So yes, you can do a lot more deployments, and your total error count will be lower. In terms of what you automate, what you can automate with Puppet, in general, if you're not embarrassed to admit that you run it, you can probably manage it with Puppet. And in many cases, even if you are embarrassed to admit that you run it, you can also manage it with Puppet. Things like AIX, I think, are a good example of the other side of the coin. When we talk about what we're managing, we usually start with, what's the main stuff that you do on your servers? You've got users, groups, packages, file systems, mount points, services, almost anything like that. But then you translate to, we can also manage switches, we can manage F5 load balancers, in some cases we can manage storage devices, and depending on the device, we're either installing Puppet directly on the device, and that's the case for, I think, Nexus switches from Cisco and Arista switches, and Cumulus switches, but in cases like F5, we can't get software directly onto the box, but we can speak to it through its APIs. So in those cases, we can still directly manage those things. And crucially, we don't care whether you're a physical or a virtual machine. We don't care if you're a container or a VM. We don't care if you're a public or a private cloud. We don't care if you're inside the firewall or outside. None of those things matter. We can take into account all that information, but they don't prevent us from doing automation in your infrastructure. In terms of how you use Puppet, in terms of the workflow that you experience, it's a very developer-like experience, and it's a very developer-like tool chain. Now that isn't to say you're going to become a developer. We think it's, there's a reason why sysadmins developers have different jobs, and no matter what, somebody has to carry the pager, and there's always somebody who's more concerned about uptime, and there's always somebody who's more concerned about reducing your uptime. But I'm sure they have other jobs too, I just don't know exactly what they are. But there is this change to your workflow, and I still meet too many sysadmins who essentially all their development goes on in production. Well, I SSH to the main server, and then I type a bunch of shell commands, and if the terminal returns, then I know that it worked. And, you know, it works, I guess, but instead you kind of convert to this build, test, deploy loop where somewhere not production, you do a lot of development, and then you go through some test cycle that can be as simple as running Puppet in simulation mode on your production server, because maybe you only got 3 servers, and it's not worth building a 10-server test environment with your 3-server production environment. So you can do some very, very simple testing, including syntax checking and things like that. Or you can do quite complex testing. You can build a complete build pipeline using Jenkins and using, build up VMs, build up your complete application stack, build up monitoring for your application stack, confirm the whole thing works in development, and only then deploy to production. So you have a lot of control over how much confidence you want before you deploy. And the crucial thing is you get this iterative loop where every time you go to deploy, you've got this build pipeline-like process, and you can build QA into your IT experience, which is really great. So what are the consequences of doing this automation, right? I mean, obviously, new technology is great for its own sake, and that's the main reason why all of us are here. We don't, we just want to play with new toys. But what does it mean for your job? What does it mean for your work? So one of the things we found I guess 3 of the things we found in our DevOps survey was people who adopt the best practices and the best technology in DevOps are able to, in general, deploy 30 times more frequently, right? So for a company, I talk to companies all the time who, on average, they do 1 to 2 deployments of their core technology a year. So it takes them about 3 quarters to do a software deployment. So this is going from, every few quarters to every few days, which is a really, really significant difference. And even though they're doing 30 times as many deployments, they experience half as many errors, right? That's not half as many per deployment. That's just half as many, right? So on average, you deploy every 3 quarters and half of those deployments fail. Now you deploy every 3 days and you still get 1 failure a year. That's pretty damn good. And obviously, one of the things that the survey doesn't show, but is kind of clear, what begins to matter then is not so much do you experience errors, but what's your mean time to recovery? Because if you're able to deploy this frequently, your mean time to recovery on 1 deployment a year might be a year, which would be pretty bad. But your mean time to recovery if you're doing a deployment every 3 days is probably going to look more like minutes or hours, which is really great. And the really interesting thing is, and obviously we can't claim causal relationship, but I'm going to claim a causal relationship, is companies who successfully, who are fantastic, who are great on the technology end of the spectrum, experience they're worth more because they're better technology. Cool. So Puppet's one of the fastest growing technology skills in the market right now, and this is one of the consequences, right? People see the strong benefits of Puppet, of automation, and as a result, and this is again, it's a US-based survey, I believe, but I think it shows, if anything, it's probably more so in Europe than it is in the US. So I want to talk quickly about how Puppet works, how you actually use it in real life. So at its basis, I talked about all the things you can manage: users, groups, file systems, packages, mount points, etc. You specify all those things using a very simple configuration language. It is a custom language, but it is a very simple language. And the goal with the language is to have it be simple enough for most. The goal of the language is to have it feel like a configuration file, not programming. I don't want to ask every sysadmin in the world to become a programmer, even if you do end up doing programming-like things. I know it's a simple language because a lot of our customers hand their Puppet code to auditors, and the auditors are able to understand it. And if auditors can understand it, you know it's simple. So this is an example of, it's we simplified it a little bit so it fit onto one page that's still readable, but you've got your file, the package to install, the file to configure, the service to run. The things that are most crucial about this are you're describing the state you want the world to be in, not the work to do to get into that state. And that's important because given 1,000 machines, they're all going to be in a very similar state, but they're probably not all going to be exactly the same state. So if you have to do all of the imperative stuff where you say, well, if it looks like this, then do this, then it gets relatively complicated. But with this, you just say, look, I don't care what you look like right now, go look like this. And Puppet's job is to either make it look like that or fail in a relatively useful way and explain to you why it couldn't do that. What that also gives you is the ability to run this multiple times. So if you're used to a provisioning system where you can provision it one time, but then the next time you have to go use shell scripts or some other solution, this solves that. You can run this every half an hour on your infrastructure for roughly the rest of eternity. And if it's not configured correctly, it'll do the right thing. And if it is configured correctly, it'll do nothing at all, which is pretty useful. This is an example of how you would use that, a class like that. Obviously, again, this is a little more complicated prototype. NTP is one of those really little things, kind of like admins. When it's working great, you kind of wonder why people even bother with it. When it's not working great, you wonder where all the smoke is coming from. Simple example of how you would, how you configure NTP across your infrastructure. And you can tune this so it's things like, my European data centers all have a slightly different time pool than my American-based data centers or things like that. So there is some flexibility in there. This is also an example of how you would deploy IIS on Windows. I kind of cut my teeth on Solaris and definitely a more Unix, Linux person in the beginning, but we've been working very hard on supporting everything else in your data center over the last few years. We've got very strong Windows support. We've got a great team dedicated to Windows. And here's an example of backslashes. So you're welcome. I swear whoever invented that had to have a broken pinky or something. Architecturally, Puppet is a pretty simple client-server tool. It feels and acts like a web server because it's a web server. All the agents on all of your machines talk to Puppet over HTTPS. Yes, it's always HTTPS. And authentication's an X509 absolute bog standard certificate. And unlike really all the other tools in the market, Puppet does a lot more work on the server than anybody else. In a lot of other cases, including most of the tools that came before Puppet, you would send all the code down to all the machines and do work there, and really all the server does is file serving. A lot of other tools out there, mostly the server is just a file server, so it scales fantastically because it turns out our web servers are very good at serving files because that's all they do. And Puppet, we do a lot more work on the server, and there are a bunch of reasons why we think doing that work on the server is better. You don't have to do that if you want to send all the files out. It works basically as well then too. But if you consolidate everything onto the server, then you get a lot of security benefits just to start. So you get, no one else can see your code, so your code is only in one place. So if you get an individual machine gets compromised, all they have is the configuration for that one machine. They don't get any other configurations for other machines. They don't get any other code. And crucially, you configure your server to be able to talk to all of your other services, right? Your server can talk to your ticketing system, it can talk to your CMDB, it can talk to all your databases, it can talk to your authentication service. If you don't use a central server that has all those special rights, then every machine in your infrastructure has to have those rights. I think that's a bad idea, especially in this world where you never quite know where your servers are running, right? You could have machines on different platforms and different data centers on different continents. So being able to consolidate access control, being able to consolidate code into one place gives you a lot of flexibility. It's also much faster and simpler to deploy your Puppet code to one place or to a couple of servers rather than to every machine in your infrastructure. So, and then, yeah. By default, every machine in your infrastructure wakes up every half an hour, connects back to Puppet, says, hey, here's everything I know about myself, pulls down a bunch of plugins, pulls down its configuration, applies that configuration locally, and then sends a report back up saying, here's everything I know about myself. Here are the changes I made, if any. And if it didn't make any changes, it just says, nothing happened. And if it made changes, it says, here are all the things that happened. And so if I had to update a package, then here are the services I restarted, or I tried to restart the service, but it didn't work, things like that. So that That's all tunable. If you want to have it run once a day, if you want to have it run, we have customers who are banks and or paranoid, and so they only run Puppet in simulation mode during the week, and then on weekends when they've got maintenance windows. In many cases, it's relatively reasonable. You're a stock exchange. Very few things are worth risking your stock exchange going down during the middle of the day. So they'll wait until the weekend to actually deploy any changes, but they get reports coming back all week saying, kind of here are all these pending changes that are being saved up in the environment. The way that you tell Puppet, here's the code I want you to run, is what we call classification. So we've got a node manager that's a rules-based classification engine that allows you to pretty quickly say, look, if a machine looks like this, I want you to go apply these classes. If it's a Red Hat machine, I want you to apply the Red Hat class. If it's a Debian machine, I want you to apply the Debian class. If it's got this IP space, I want you to apply this kind of maybe a Europe-based classification. And this is a new commercial application from us that came out in Puppet Enterprise 3.7. We announced at PuppetConf and was available in November. And you'll see more updates on that in 2 months. We also give you a lot of insight into what's going on. For all the machines I've got, who's up to date, who's got failures, who's had changes made recently, who's actually still connecting, right? In some cases, machines disappear off the network, so you want to get some sense of who's not responding, who's not updating. And once you discover a failure, you want to be able to quickly figure out, okay, is this, when I see red on every machine in my environment, is that because every single resource is failing? Is that one resource that's failing? Is that one important resource that's failing? Like, did I fail to update the MOTD on every machine in my environment? Or is SSH turned off? Or all the databases down? Like, you want to be able to figure that out pretty quickly, and ideally you'd want to be able to figure that out not by going to each machine individually, but by looking at a central console. So we give you that simple central console to understand what's happening in the environment, what's going on. I talked about this a little bit at PuppetConf a few months ago, not years. So for those of you who maybe were there. Some people were there, and for those who watched it, we're in the process of. So Puppet Enterprise has been around for almost exactly 4 years now. We first launched it in February of 2011, and yes, it is actually 4 years from 2011. That's insane. I agree. And it's grown quite a bit, and we've realized that we're beginning to have conflicting goals. On the one hand, I want to keep putting out new software very quickly, and our customers are always saying, on the one hand, it's frustrating that I have to always update my Puppet Enterprise. On the other hand, why don't you have this new feature yet? And the way we plan on trying to accommodate both of those at the same time is we're going to have a core platform, which is, Puppet's relatively stable. There's still a lot going on in Puppet, but it's relatively stable, and it's going to change a lot less frequently. And then we're going to have these individual applications like node management and the operations manager that are going to change more frequently. And the nice thing is you can look at updating those things on a regular basis without any risk that they're going to hurt the core platform. And we're going to have clean and simple APIs between them all. So when you look at if I make a change here, how likely is it to affect something else? We think we'll be able to make it so that any one of these pieces can change without really having any, not no risks, but much lower risks to their pieces. So what that should mean for all of you is more frequent software releases, more frequent updates, without a lot of the costs and a lot of the risks that come with those software updates. And just one example of something we also have put out recently. For those of you who are running Puppet at scale, meaning at least thousands of clients, and in many cases tens of thousands, it can be hard to understand what the heck is going on, right? So you've got, why is it slow? What's slow? Where is the slowness? Do I need to add capacity? Do I have too much capacity? You can figure it out, but it's not necessarily transparent. So we built a simple instrumentation service that today just feeds into a Grafana database, but you can really quickly, whether you've got one Puppet server or 15 Puppet servers, you can quickly figure out what's going on my infrastructure. So we had a case where a customer had they called us and said, Puppet is incredibly slow, we can't use this, nothing works. And after a little while, and of course, no customer ever calls you and says, I have broken my stuff and I'm doing something stupid, can you help me figure it out? They all say, you people are all incompetent and evil, stop breaking my infrastructure. And in this case, what they had done is they had written a custom Puppet function that did some sort of recursal YAML parsing in Ruby, and YAML in Ruby is nearly as fast as I can't come up with anything that's really slow. It's incredibly slow. So they had this function that by itself was taking like 90 seconds on every single Puppet run. And it was consuming a massive amount of CPU at the same time. And after a little while, we could figure out, we were able to pinpoint, oh, okay, here's that function. Of course, we had to rewrite the function for them. But then after that function was done in a much faster way, they went, oh, okay, actually Puppet's super fast. Never mind, I don't have a problem. So one of the things that this console can help you quickly figure out is, which functions am I running? Which ones take the most time? So when you experience slowness, you can very quickly figure out what is actually the source of the slowness, which we think is pretty fantastic. So that's kind of a quick overview of what you interact with when you use Puppet. Here are the things that I'm going to interact with on a regular basis. But I also want to walk through a couple of the many open source tools that make up either a production open source Puppet implementation or Puppet Enterprise if you're using that. So first is all this data I'm talking about, the data that the client sends back to the server, the reports, the catalogs, all the configurations, all that's stored in PuppetDB. So you've got a central database service. It's an API it's got a nice query language. That knows every machine you're managing, every resource you're managing on any of those machines. It knows all the dependencies between those resources. It knows every change that's ever happened to any of those resources, plus all the facts about all of your individual servers. So it's a huge amount of data. We've got mcollective for execution. So if you want to do things like run Puppet quickly on all the machines in your environment, if you want to, mcollective has a lot of other tools for things like flushing mail queues, which again, we've already established mail is evil, but it's got a lot of powerful orchestration tools, and it's really built for in real time. I want to find every Red Hat machine in my environment and check the kernel version, or I want to check the SSL version because another Heartbleed-like thing just got announced. So you can quickly, okay, who's vulnerable? Okay, go write the Puppet code to fix that. Go run Puppet on all those machines immediately. Bam! 10 minutes later, you've got your whole system is only vulnerable to the vulnerabilities you don't know about, as opposed to the one that just got announced this morning. Razor is a physical provisioning tool whose goal is to make physical provisioning feel like virtual machine provisioning. It can do virtual machine provisioning too, but it's really built to try to bring the dynamism and flexibility of virtual machine and cloud provisioning to the world of physical provisioning. And the nice thing is it's meant to be relatively small and integrate directly into Puppet as opposed to do a lot of work on its own. So all the classification, all of the it's got its own rules engine, but all the other like fact discovery and things like that goes into Factor, that uses mcollective. So it's able to be a much smaller tool than general purpose provisioning tools. I'm not going to say much about Hyra. If you're already using it, you probably couldn't live without it. If you aren't using it, mostly go look into it. The goal of Hyra is basically it's to make your modules more reusable. It's to take a lot of the data that is custom to your environment, help you get it out of your modules, make it version controllable and shareable. R10K is a deployment application that we're in the process of rolling into Puppet Enterprise. It should be in the next version of PE that's out in this quarter. And its job is to bundle up all the modules you use, deploy those quickly to your server, and help you manage, especially the promotion of those modules from your development environment into test, into production as a unit. So basically kind of building the development workflows into your environment. And people might be using Puppet Librarian for a similar thing today. Yeah, I think that's about all there is to say about that. And then there's also, we just announced as around PuppetConf, and I think the 1.0 came out last quarter, is a new Puppet front end, and this is a new web server front end for all the Puppet tools, and this is all written in Clojure. So traditionally Puppet's all been in Ruby, and Puppet server itself is in Clojure. This gives you, it's about 3 times faster than the Ruby version of the Puppet server, and really crucially, it's much more resilient. All servers will fail at some point, so the question isn't will it ever fail, the question is when it fails, how does it fail? And Ruby tends to fail catastrophically. Wow, this is all really great. Why is everything on fire? And Clojure runs in the JVM, and because it's in the JVM, there are all things we all hate about the JVM, but you have to admit, the darn thing is pretty solid. And so when it starts to get overloaded or things like that, you have a lot better tools, you have a lot better debugging, and just it degrades like this instead of like that. So in terms of, I realized this morning as I was eating breakfast. This label is kind of a lie. This isn't really our roadmap. It's more like, here are the things we're focusing on. So like Puppet Server shows, we as a company, so the vast majority of our technology is open source, but the vast majority of that open source technology is still done by people who Puppet Labs pays. So the majority of the development is done by Puppet Labs developers. And our focus, one of our major focuses is still significant improvements in the core. That's from things like on the server side, rewriting a lot of that core technology into Clojure. And we chose Clojure because we had a team that knew Clojure, and we wanted it to be something that was a modern compiled language. We wanted it to be faster. We wanted it to be more reliable. And PuppetDB is in Clojure. It's been around for a long time. If you're already using PuppetDB, you will need to care about Clojure just as much with all the other tools as you do with PuppetDB, which is to say, not at all. On the client side, C-Factor is a good example, is a good indication of our direction on the client side. So C-Factor is a re-implementation of Factor in C++. That'll become the new default Factor in the next couple of months, which should be with Puppet 4, which is going to come out soon. Weeks, not quarters. And what you're going to see is us carve off pieces of the Puppet client side and re-implement those in C++ also. This is going to be, for those of you who write plugins in Puppet, this is going to be better for you, not worse. Today, all the plugins you write in any part of the Puppet ecosystem pretty much have to be written in Ruby today. But you've seen in Factor, we now support external facts. These are plugins to Factor that can be written in JSON or YAML. Obviously, in those cases, it's just data being imported in, or Shell or Perl or Ruby. We still support the old Ruby API, but then we also support kind of any other new way of getting data in. As we rewrite parts of Puppet into C++, you're going to see that same kind of flexibility. You'll be able to write a native type in something that's not Ruby, and so it'll be easier for you, and you'll have a much faster, smaller, more reliable, more easily debuggable core. Who's ever had to open up Ruby in the debugger because of something going wrong? It's miserable, isn't it? Yeah, so that'll be better too. We're also really heavily investing in ubiquity in the data center. We want every single IP-connected device in your data center. Actually, I want every IP-connected device in your world to be managed by Puppet. Before too long, you'll have more IP-connected devices in your house than a typical data center had in 2000. So as we approach that, I want to make sure that those little Internet of Things, sensors in your light bulbs also run Puppet. But for now, we're focusing on the data center. So working heavily with Cisco and Arista and F5 and NetApp and Juniper and Microsoft to get Puppet working well on all those devices. And in some cases, we're working effectively with those companies. In some cases, we are keeping them distracted while we support them some other way. We're also heavily focused on application management. And this is really about helping our users and our customers kind of shift focus from the individual machines and the individual resources and applications you're managing in those machines to thinking about your application as a whole. So not, I need to update my database servers and then my web servers, but rather I need to update my application, which includes database servers, application servers, web servers, load balancers, and things like that. And so it's really when I go to deploy an application or I go to update an application, you want your deployment tools to inherently understand things like ordering based on how your application is built. Things like if you've got rules about does your web server need to be pulled out of the load balancer before it gets updated, things like that. You want your application management system to do all that for you. So that's actually my personal focus in the company. And then continuing to invest in reusable infrastructure on the Forge. My goal for the Forge, our goal for the Forge is we want 80% of the problems that you have to solve in your environment to be solvable with modules you can download directly from the Forge and use in production without modification. There are plenty of modules on the Forge right now that work well for this, but we know there are changes we need to make to the language, there are changes we need to make to the tool chain, and we just need to have a greater level of maturity on the Forge. So you've seen things like we've now got ratings on the Forge, we've got a lot better tooling to help you understand which are the high quality modules, which are the modules that the rest of the community is already relying on, and then which modules maybe are a little too experimental or maybe not as well maintained. So our focus is not on only allowing high quality in, but it is on really helping you understand where quality is and where maybe it's not as high quality. So obviously, Many of you are already involved in the community in some ways. Puppet Camp is a great place to go next. But if you do want to get involved, we have a huge amount of community resources. We've got so many places you can go to participate. Step one is go fix a bunch of bugs. No, that's not probably step one. But mailing lists, IRC channels, Q&A sites, our ticketing system is actually a great place to go get involved. Even if you can't fix bugs, going and helping improve the quality of bug reports, filing bugs is actually incredibly useful. And yeah, all kinds of jokes I can make there. A huge amount of learning tools online. So we've got both self-paced 5-minute courses to help you walk through the basics, all the way to we now do virtual courses where we have a real-time instructor, I think just a person, but it's virtual, so you're doing it over the internet, and you do like 1 day a week for 3 weeks in a row, and you do kind of a half-day course each week. So it's a great way to get up to speed on new things. I think we're working on a Puppet for Windows course right now, for example. I swear we've got some of the best documentation of any project out there. We've got a team of 7 or 8 docs people who work full-time on our docs. It's a great place to go learn more about the project, to go all the way from seriously what is this Puppet thing to really getting deep on a lot of the development aspects, or just a lot of the really interesting deeper parts of Puppet. We've got a huge amount of training, certification tools, and for those of you who are partners of ours, we certainly push all of our partners to get certified so that our customers have a decent probability of being sure that they're working with experts. And then you can also really help us make the product better. So we do a lot of pre-release testing and then also post-release testing to try to understand, and mostly it just involves us sitting behind you and watching you use the product or asking you a bunch of questions about what's working and what's not. So that's really helpful to us, and it's really helpful to you because it allows you to help us improve the product. So please please join the test pilot program. And then lastly, we're always hiring, especially in Europe, we're hiring services people. If you like travel, we end up doing a lot of travel. We're hiring technical solutions engineers. So if you want to help convince the world to use Puppet, that's a great place to join the evangelism program functionally. And then PuppetConf is coming back to Portland, and Kara mentioned the weather in Portland is a lot like the weather here in Amsterdam. Portland's also one of the most European-like cities. It really is a fantastic city. It's hard to get much further from Amsterdam and still be in the US than Portland is, but so it's a bit far away, but it'll be a great event, and hopefully some of you can make it there. And I guess the last point I would make is there is a lot left. Do not let yourself believe that we are nearly done with this technical shift. There are decades and decades of investment and change and interesting iteration left in this world. So don't get too attached to any one particular trend, but also, it's just so easy to think, this wave is nearly crested, and I think in reality this wave is just now building. So thank you very much. And I guess I don't have as much time for questions as I thought.
We do have time for a few questions, though, and I ask that after you call on someone, I can bring you a microphone. You can say your question in the microphone.
Any questions? Really? Come on. That's embarrassing. There we go.
Red Hat is providing Satellite 6 with an integration of some Puppet module repository. What would be the added value of the enterprise Puppet in this environment?
I appreciate you asking me this because I was warned I was going to be asked this by a bunch of people. Now I can just answer it to everybody at once. Who here is using Satellite right now? Who loves Satellite? So we got one yes. That's my basic answer. I mean, I think it's fantastic that Red Hat is investing in Puppet. I think it's great that Red Hat is validating Puppet and is telling all of its users, by the way, you should use Puppet. I think that the major reason why they're doing that is because Satellite 6 is a relatively limited product in the first place, and Puppet kind of subsumes that functionality and does a couple of other things to go with it. I think the work they did in Satellite 6 with Puppet certainly makes Satellite a more compelling product, but fundamentally, I've never seen a vendor produce management software that does what its customers really need. It's almost impossible, because as a vendor, you only care about managing Red Hat, right? If you're Red Hat, you only care about Red Hat. You're never going to produce an AIX management product or a Windows management product or anything like that, or a Debian management product, God forbid. And then it's also, if Red Hat sucks, Red Hat knows pretty quickly if Red Hat sucks. If Satellite sucks, Red Hat doesn't really care if Satellite sucks. And it's not that that means that Satellite will inherently suck, but it does mean that their priorities, their focus, their goal isn't really built around Satellite being great. It's really built around Red Hat being great and selling as much Satellite as they can. So for us as a company, our goal is to be the most successful pure play management company. I want to make it so that you don't have to buy Cisco's proprietary management product and VMware's proprietary management product and Red Hat's proprietary management product and NetApp's and Splunk's and Cloudera's and everybody else's. You've got one product, one platform, one technology that can manage all of those. I think that's better for our customers because it allows you to make a cross-platform, cross-data center investment and really reap that across all of your teams. In some sense, it doesn't really matter what any one of them individually do because they're never going to work across all of your environments. So in general, that's my basic response, but I think there are always going to be inherent limitations to vendor products. So mostly for me, I'm excited that Red Hat is standing up and saying, Puppet is great, you should use Puppet. I think the specifics of how they're doing Satellite, one of the things that is always going to be tough, we're updating our software, let's say slightly more frequently than Red Hat LTS gets updated. So it's going to be interesting to see how that gets handled, especially as we upgraded frequently. You look at Puppet 4 comes out, we've rewritten a bunch of pieces in C++, and RHEL is still running on Puppet 3.7. What happens then? It's going to be interesting to figure that out. We used to rely heavily on the distros to distribute our software, but what our customers have been telling us over the last, say, 3 years is they would prefer to use our distributed packages instead of the distros because the distros just they don't update frequently enough. So we've been moving away, our customers have been moving away from using distros to even use our software in the first place. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. But overall, I think it's great validation. I'm excited, but I don't think that many of our customers will use it. And I don't think that many of Red Hat's even customers will use it.
I've noticed that you mentioned deployment a couple of times during your talk. Does it mean that you have something planned in the roadmap for supporting deployment, application deployment in a different or better or more specific ways? Can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. I'm sorry, did you have a follow-up question?
Can you elaborate on that maybe?
I can't say much about it right now for two reasons. One is I don't like giving secrets away, and two is there are some parts that we're very sure about and some parts we're not as sure about. And we don't, there's a very real possibility that even the parts I'm sure about, reality is going to smack me in the face really quickly. But there are some things that you can be sure about based both on like how Puppet is and if you've ever talked to me at all, the things that I deeply believe. So I think imperative deployment systems where you build a long, complicated if structure and things like that, I think it's a loser. We're not going to build something that looks like that. We're also not going to build a complicated UML diagram where you connect dots together in boxes and then it hands off to shell scripts. We're not going to do that. Those are the two most common deployment scenarios out there in the world. We're not going to build either one of those. And then, obviously, we're big fans of declarative deployments. We're big declarative configurations. We're big fans of item potency. So overall, our plan is to be able to specify your application configurations in Puppet code the same way you can specify your node configurations. We're going to have to add some new capabilities to the syntax, not changes. That is to say, it's not going to change how the system works today, but it's new functionality that allows you to talk about things at the application level. And then, along with that new configuration, building new tools that go with it. So obviously, there's no tool today that does the right thing in terms of running Puppet in the right order in all your environments. So we have to build that tool. So building the new language and then the new tooling that connects to that language. The one thing I can tell you is today, I think one of the most confusing parts about Puppet is you push code out to your server and at some point, magically, that starts deploying to your clients. We want to give you much more control of that, so I don't think it'll quite be in Puppet 4, but it'll be soon thereafter. Our code, we've got a bunch of small changes that we're all wrapping up under a thing we're calling, I think it's Direct Puppet. It's just it's a silly name. It's not an actual product. It's just a way of saying these 5 features deliver this thing. But basically, to give you much more control over when I push code, I would like to be able to say, I would like to then have control and visibility over how that code push I just made deploys out to the individual machines. That's not a new technology, but it gives you the ability to begin to hack that new technology up. But so that's kind of a small step in Puppet itself. But yes, we're working on a deployment system that's going to look and feel a lot like Puppet. It's going to take the things that you've already learned how to use in Puppet. You already think in declarative idempotent systems. You think in terms of you understand how graphs and how to use graphs and how to use graph traversal to make changes. We're not going to ask you to learn something new, right? We're going to reuse as much of that understanding as you've already got. I think that's it. Thank you very much. Have a great day at Puppet Camp.